Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Masters of Marketing. I am your host, Tara Levy, and today I'm very excited because I've got the wonderful Gordon Glenister with me, who not only is from my home country, so that's very exciting, but he is a presenter of the Influence podcast. He is CEO and co-founder of Membership World, and overall, he is an influencer marketing and membership expert. Gordon, welcome to Masters of Marketing.
Lovely to see you here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I've been looking forward to this one. So to jump straight in, I wanted to pick your brain about something that I think comes up a lot in the marketing world, and it has it's risen and dipped with how much it's a trend, but ethical influence in marketing. So social proof and authority. You
Mm.
seem to be an expert on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I think we're seeing so many changes in the world of influence, and having I don't know if just to give you a little bit of background, actually, I entered the influencer marketing by accident. Actually, I
Oh, no way.
used to run a trade association for the promotional merchandise industry, and I wanted to help other industry bodies. So
Hmm.
I found that there was an opportunity to represent the influencer marketing industry, and I think the reason why I was passionate about this is because, to be honest, it was a bit like the Wild West. You know, anybody could effectively become an influencer, and there weren't the same sort of advertising regulations being um, really being seen as much as they could be. And so what we wanted to do is to create some authority and support for not only content creators, but also for brands as well, in making sure
Hmm.
that they're working with the right people. So we set about creating a set of influencer marketing guidelines, which included ethical best practices.
Hmm.
Because, you know, if you're a brand now, you want to, I mean, the influencer marketing industry is huge. I mean, from 2016, it was like $1.6 billion. Globally, it's 25 odd this year, but it's
Hmm.
expected to reach 100 billion by 2030. So its
100 billion,
meteoric
no
rise
way.
is huge. And I think that's also because we trust opinions of people that we like, that we can relate to. And that's what's so important. But what we want to make sure is the person that we are connecting with is real, genuine, and honest. And this world of um, trust, which has been eroded over the last few years by sort of political landscapes, we need to make sure that we can. But often, content creators, influencers are trusted sources. They've built up communities. They have a huge amount of knowledge about their sector specific. But like anybody, you've also got to do your right due diligence. You've got to make sure that
Hmm.
they are that they're going to actually represent your brand. I mean, something as simple, honestly, tomorrow as checking and making sure that the influencers are well briefed, for example, that there is a
Yeah.
contract in place so that they really understand exactly what's required of them, and what the brand's going to get. Because if I'm going to pay you a few £100 or a few £1,000 for a campaign, I want to make sure that I know what I'm getting. It's the same thing as if you were spending money on advertising. You want to make sure that happens.
Absolutely. And I think you're completely right. It's something that influencer marketing really started to rise, and we saw it took off on so many different social media platforms. I think that's the easiest kind of jump to people's mind with it. But then you start to see it in employer branding as well. A lot of brands jumped on the let's show the people behind the brand, the people in the
Mm,
office. You get office humor, you get, this is what went wrong, this is what went right, the ethical practices behind that. And it goes in so many different ways. And it's to build that trust for authenticity, for loyalty.
yeah.
And that you can also see that there's, it backfires. So everything you said about contracts, it's when something backfires and the influencer suddenly has something very negative about them, you can see the brands just start to desperately backpedal. So,
Mm,
I think the fact that you do focus on the ethical build of trust and that kind of like, I guess, drive to action after that is really important. But
mm.
I think to carry on with something that's a slight tangent from what you were saying, but I think a lot of what comes with the ethical influence in marketing is also storytelling. And that's something that I think you're quite passionate about.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, it comes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago about relatability.
Hmm.
Facts tell, but stories sell. You're more
Yes.
likely to remember a story that really is relatable. It's emotional. It carries more weight. And I think brands need to try and develop more of a personality rather than be driven by some of the sort of corporate advertising that we so often see. And that's the reason
Hmm.
why you just talked about employee advocates and ambassadors. That's been a huge growth. In fact, your average employee piece of content is 8 times more engaging than that of a company.
Eight
Um,
times.
eight
Wow.
8 times, yeah. And people like Starbucks have invested heavily in this. Um, Many other retailers, of course, have realized that they are great social ambassadors for the brand, and that's because they're doing stuff like behind the scenes content, or they are charting their experiences in their new job as a graduate. Maybe what's it like? Because as I often
Mm.
say, um, you know, if you want to reach out to people, particularly if you're recruiting individuals, well, why don't you ask your new intake, your new graduates, or your new people? They are more likely going to have the ideal target candidate in their niche, in their community and circle, than would be following a CEO or a CMO of that organization. And
So true. Yeah.
if you can get individuals within your own business, really advocating on their own personal social media, that speaks volumes. That actually
Yes.
helps and really create the sort of thought leadership within the organization. Um, what it also does is it helps reduce recruitment fees, potentially advertising fees, because those people are generating leads for you. In fact, I only interviewed somebody on my podcast from Panasonic the other day, and they have a really successful advocacy program, and they actually tested it with just 5 of their top salespeople, and they asked them to literally just focus on 5 prime customers that were on their wish list. And
Hmm.
all they did was double down on content that was related to those 5 people. So they were looking for 25 meetings. And when I spoke to her, and she told me that we've so far been able to achieve 22 out of those 25 meetings. And that's because we took a very targeted fishing rod approach rather than
Hmm.
so you can see, advocacy and can make a real big difference when you do it right.
That's crazy. That's a huge percentage. That's almost like the kind of the wildest dreams concept of sales. I think when they go, "Oh, reach for the stars," and you're like, "No, they actually got that."
Yeah.
They've gone past the
But
stars.
also you're more likely to get the interest from the employees, because rather than being told by marketing to go and promote
Mm,
this or do this, or we're at the show, can you share this? It feels like a task. Oh dear,
yeah.
do I have to do this? But actually, if you play to their passions, if you play to their skills and knowledge, they're more likely wanting to share it, because actually, if it affects their pipeline and their success criteria, that means more commission, more bonus, and more success overall.
And therefore, why not? Why wouldn't you do this?
Yeah.
So if there was a company or a brand listening who kind of went, right, we don't really have employee advocacy at the moment for whatever reason, what would you recommend to the high levels, the C levels, board members, and then coming down through managers that they can do to start this process? Like you said, sometimes from the marketing side, it can feel very forced.
Mm.
Can you post that you were here and show that you were there? And people go, okay, but I don't care. So
Yeah.
why would anyone else?
So, earlier this year, I saw the massive shift in this area. So, with 2 other individuals, I actually launched an agency called employfluence.com.
Hmm.
And we've been working in this for a number of months now. I've spoken about it quite widely. And what we do, we're working with a great client at the moment, and what we start with is strategy, is the why. Is the why
Okay.
what is it that you're trying to measure? Yeah, you're
Hmm.
trying to create an advocacy program. For me, the three pillars would normally be sales, marketing, and HR. In other
Yeah.
words, are you looking to drive sales? Are you looking to drive brand, or are you looking to drive recruitment? And it could be one or other or all of those areas. So for
Hmm.
me, it's about thinking about the most ideal candidates. So rather than think, right, let's have an advocacy program and let's make it open to all. No, let's actually start to think about recruiting people that are most likely to perform on social media. So you create a little bit of an application process. This is
Okay.
what IBM do really successful, and they're leaders in this. In fact, they have over 200 IBMers, they call themselves, and they have a whole range of merchandise attributed to it, and it's actually a contract. It's an online
Oh,
contract
wow.
which they get to renew or not, based around what KPIs they've
Ah.
achieved. Bearing in mind, this is on their own social, but
Hmm.
obviously the company is providing them with all sorts of support and guidance and all
Yeah.
manner of different things, including a famous blue jacket, by the way. Because if you've reached a certain pinnacle, you are
Yeah, you
seen.
get it as a almost like a status symbol, right?
Absolutely, which is very
Hmm.
visible amongst your peer community and amongst your customer group. So these are the guys that know their stuff, you know.
Hmm.
And therefore, by not opening it to everybody, you create a little bit of a FOMO effect. You make the people that are there real thought leaders because they're playing to their own strengths, and the company is there to support them. So you can also do stuff like gamification, where you are promoting the top five that are creating content. You are effectively working with these individuals, maybe including them in reports rather than it just be the
Mm.
CEO. Like an IBM, for example, has multiple divisions within its own organization. So you can almost have somebody in cyber commenting, you have somebody in another area. So they've almost become global experts. And that has gone down super, super well. But it isn't just about those areas. It could also be about people that are creating an impact on a production line, people in finance.
Yeah.
Everybody can play a part. For me, I always say this to everybody is in marketing, everybody, because every touch point, whether it's in finance, if somebody has you guys could be doing a great job in building brand, and the sales team are doing a great job, but when it comes to paying a bill and a client has had some problems and they get a shirty
Yeah.
finance person, no disrespect to the finance industry, but they do.
Everyone in finance is going, I don't know what you're talking about. We're delightful.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
everybody has an impact, and a touch point as well. So it's also making everybody feel valued, so that when you start to put content online, other the left hand is starting to appreciate what the right hand is doing. And I know, having worked for
Mm.
big brands before, there's so much silo stuff that goes on where people
Yeah.
are not knowing what the others are doing. Oh, I thought sales did just this, or I just thought finance did that, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're all in this together, and it's the more we can support each other by building a great brand, the better.
So the human capital aspect just kind of really shows that there's so many
100%.
levels behind the marketing power that you should utilize what you can with it. And that doesn't mean that everyone has to be an employee advocate, because if everyone in your company is doing that, you start going, is everyone having this fantastic of a day all the time? Like, maybe
Yes.
not, but
Yes.
looking everywhere, because you're completely right. And I think as younger generations come into the workforce who do grow up with social media and this sort of influence, it's more natural for them.
Mm.
So you mentioned IBM. So to pick your brain slightly, if someone wanted to go and have a look aside from IBM at companies who are doing employee advocacy really well, who are your favorites?
Dell Computers is
Hmm.
one that springs to mind. I know that Coca-Cola have done some really cool things. Um, I know that Shell are also doing some great things.
Hmm.
I think one of the things I've liked is when they're reaching out to universities, for example, and they're
Yes.
using perhaps some of their newer intake that's been there, and and then actually sending them on the what they call the milk round or whatever it is.
Hmm.
It's the university. So and actually, if I was a student and I'd seen somebody that's a couple of years older than mine having a great experience, I'm more likely to listen to that rather than somebody that is well, somebody like me, perhaps, or somebody older that is unrelatable to
Yeah.
those younger people in terms of their immediate career. Um,
So it's almost like the not saying that this is totally it, but different ages will influence different people. You know, either your let's say Gen Z and millennials might influence your recommenders and influencers a little bit more than maybe your C levels and decision makers, but you need those people to get to the decision makers,
of
and it
course you
comes
do.
at all the levels.
I mean, I also believe in 360, what do you call it? 365, what do you call it when you have HR appraisals? Now,
Appraisals, yeah.
once upon a time, it was always about what it was the older person was always the one sort of
Mm,
sharing their wisdom. Well, I will tell you this. As a university lecturer on influencer marketing, I absolutely love hearing from my students when they've completed their influencer marketing strategy, bearing in mind I've only given them 2 lectures, and what they've produced with their brand strategies really, really inspires me because they're coming at it from a different lens. And that's what I
mm,
love is so in other words, my generation can learn a hell of a lot when it comes to content creation, influencer
yes.
marketing. And I like to think, vice versa. So it shouldn't be just because you've got a certain amount of years in an organization that you know more. Not at all. It's about how can we learn from each other.
So then to flip it onto the, let's say, older generations, I don't know if that's a little bit the higher levels in the company that traditionally may be a little bit older, your C levels, if
Mm.
they wanted to focus on almost acting as an employee advocate for their own company. Now that's a different lens to look through because you do kind of assume that, yes, but they're the CEO, CMO, CFO, or whatever. Of course, they're going to say nice things. How would you recommend they go about it? Because it's not that they would do something different in particular, but I would assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that at a minimum, there would be a different tone of voice there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's where they often need support and help. I mean, there'll be
Hmm.
people out there that perhaps are not so, the last thing they would probably be thinking about is going on TikTok. But there are plenty of examples of individuals that are storytellers. And because they've gone on to these platforms,
Hmm.
they have found a brand new audience. You've probably seen, grandmothers that are
Yeah.
absolutely killing it on TikTok, and they've been interviewed by their grandson that might be managing it. But because they're so authentic, they're so different to others that are on the platform. Of course, they stand out, and that's
Yes.
what people want. I mean, as I always say, just be yourself. I think sometimes PR and communications can get in the way of an overly corporate story when I want
Yeah.
to, I did a few years ago, I did a report called The Social CEO, and it was
Hmm.
for Membership World. And what we found was the people that had the biggest audiences and engagement were those people that were out and about in the field, were sharing stories, supporting their members' voices, tone of voice. They were sharing content when, like, the Wildlife Association would be out in the wildlife,
Yeah.
with his photo, rather than being in his ivory tower. The marketing society leader might be at a particular event and then showcasing some of the work from their new members and special interest groups. It's all it is. It's just about showing you care. I think that's the most
Okay.
important thing, and that people want to feel that you are not disconnected. You do care
Hmm.
about your. Do you remember that program on TV called um, was it Boss? Wasn't it where you undercover boss? Uh,
Yes, I do remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
and
For a
that
minute,
and
I was
that's
like, oh, God, no.
Yeah, but in a way, it's the sort of stuff which more people should do, and
Yeah.
realize that they've got a lot of amazing people working for them, And the moment they lose touch through loads of different levels of management is the moment they are losing touch with their customers, because I say a happy workforce is a happy customer base.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, my professional start as a teenager was in retail, and there's never more distinctive line between the people who are dealing, customer service with the public every day and are working anywhere from a 4-hour contract to a 35-hour contract a week, to then the area managers, to then management. And they have no idea what's going on in the shop. It's just a bottom line, you're not hitting this, why not do this? And I remember they would always come in once a quarter, if that. Like if that for about 2 hours. And it was always kind of this eye roll effect of, okay, we've cleaned the place up for you and everything else. You're seeing what you want to see, and
Mm,
that's it. And I think that is actually quite a good example of this is the change that's happened
yeah. I mean,
socially and in marketing and sales.
yeah, I mean, marketing isn't difficult. It's about actually just creating something that people want by using really powerful emotive messaging, and
Hmm.
never losing sight of the value proposition. What is it? What pain are you trying to solve? And what makes you different from anybody else? And sometimes it's not just about a price point. It's about the fact that you look after your people, you deliver, and the fact that you've got multiple 5-star reviews. You could be the most expensive martech solution out there, but actually, if I always say a brand is what somebody says about you when you're not in the room. I mean, Jeff Bezos was the originator of that, but it's so true.
Yeah.
It's I don't want to hear from the horse's mouth. I want to hear from others that have used the service or product, what they say. And just going back to that employee advocacy, just imagine during a pitch,
Hmm.
and you guys had an advocacy program, and over 50% of your employees were sharing regular content online. Just imagine including some of that in a pitch deck and say,
Yeah.
look, actually, we believe that our best adverts are our employees. And the reason we say that is because they're prepared to put this on their own social media, at will. We're not paying them to do that. That's because they feel so strongly about the brand. That is a massive, massive, strong message for me to say, right, I want to work with this company.
Absolutely, because it's putting on individual reputations.
Of course
It's
it is.
not
Of
just
course it is.
this is like you said, if we're not paying you to do it, and then there's always with the regulations nowadays, you have to set it as this is an ad or this was sponsored by and all of that. So if it's genuine, yes, there might have been some agreement about the topic, but if it's genuine,
Yeah.
then they're also going to bring up the negatives a little bit as well, which is good, which is what people want to hear. And I think
Yeah.
now that I've just mentioned it, have you got any good examples of when this can really go wrong? Like what to look for to avoid?
Well, I mean, when it comes to employee advocacy, one thing does come up is,
Hmm.
well, we want to make sure that we've got control of what our employees are saying. So, having proper guardrails, I think,
Hmm.
is important. Typically, a list of do's and don'ts, and and proper training. That's absolutely essential, because people can do things unwittingly or by mistake, which
Yeah.
could be harmful, um particularly in the sort of AI world. And we had a situation, I was speaking to somebody only recently, where one of their team was going to upload a load of sensitive data into ChatGPT, that it
Oh
wasn't it
no.
wasn't their own version of it. It was,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, in this day and age, ignorance isn't enough. So I
No.
think what you need to be able to be saying to people is that this is the purpose, this is the vision, this is what we're trying to do, without telling them exactly what to say, but give them some guidance,
Yeah.
and some examples that have worked really well before. But it's like, even with influencers, the moment you're over prescriptive with influencers, you're just not going to get the type of content, or they may not even want to work with you, because for them, the most important
Yeah.
thing is nourishing their audience. And if they are seen to be inauthentic or out of touch, their followers will spot that like anything.
Absolutely. And I think it really follows that a lot of people within any company they might not think of themselves as an influencer, whether you mean that in a business type term or social
Mm,
media or an employee advocate. But in reality, yeah, like if someone even puts up a bad review on Glassdoor or Yelp of a job that they've had, they're an employee advocate. Maybe not in a good way if it wasn't a positive review,
Quite,
but
absolutely.
it's
And
out there.
Glassdoor's a very good example, actually. I did work for a company that had for a little while, not very long, on a
Hmm.
contract, and I thought, "Oh my god, what have I joined?" I hadn't realized
Oh
the
no.
impact of this organization. And, I was there as marketing director, and I realized that I can't really work with this. This is the boss of this organization
Hmm.
is so bad. Um, they even hired an HR manager to try and solve the problem. And then 2 or 3 months later ended up, um, shelving the HR manager. And can you imagine what she said on Glassdoor?
I was
So,
about to say, I was like, if HR can't stand it,
no,
then
exactly,
you've got to
exactly.
start again. That's a
No.
wipe it
But,
clean.
it's an important part of employer branding,
Yeah.
because if people are talking, we've been talking about stuff positively, but you're absolutely right. If you are, disparaging, the worst thing you've got is a virus from within that can be
Yeah.
hugely toxic and very damaging. So, be careful what you wish for, in a way. I mean, the worst example, not necessarily of employer influence, but is probably the infamous Fire Festival, which was promoted
Yes,
and
that's a
viewed on
throwback.
TV. Well, it
Yeah.
goes back a few years, doesn't it? But this is where you're saying you're going to do something, and you've got loads of brands
Hmm.
on the hook for it, and you've got all of this. You've created this illusion, and obviously the delivery was awful. So the reputation is absolutely tarnished, beyond
Yeah, there's
beyond
no
all
doubting
belief.
that fact.
No.
And I think you see a lot with whether it's big brands or little brands, is that you get a lot of social tarnishing. As in, there's a trend and they jump on it and they follow it, and then people decide they actually don't like it. And so it's not just about get the employees on board, but like you said, with the guidelines, it's to make sure that everything is still within the company branding. Because whilst yes, it can be really good to jump on these trends and everything else, whether you're working with paid influencers or your employees or a third party, it's something that you have to keep in mind, that you have to make sure that the company is okay with.
Mm,
This is how we act, this is how we put ourselves out there. I know myself, I've worked with companies who hated the idea of any sort of employee advocacy and showing what was behind the scenes. They didn't think it was their point of view. Now that obviously backfired on them hugely, because as time went on, and especially past the pandemic when everything was online,
mm.
the hires went
Well,
down,
well,
people were
well,
leaving, and sales were down.
absolutely. I mean, the reality is your employees are talking about what you do anyway,
Yeah, absolutely.
and whether you like it or not. So it's really about yeah, helping them foster that sense of pride, so they do it in the right way and to a wider audience. And if you look
Hmm.
after people, they will look after you. It's as simple as that.
Absolutely. And there are some companies out there who do it amazingly. And I think there will be some companies or some people listening to the podcast who just heard the line of, they're talking about you anyway, and maybe a cold shiver went down their back,
Exactly.
because
Exactly.
it's the idea of like, you don't know what someone is saying behind your
Yeah.
back. But then because of what people are saying about the brand, the product, the company, the people, that's why you're now getting more and more, I want to work with you, or I want to buy from you, and I want this. And it's because of ABCD. And it
Quite.
might not always come from the advocacy that you planned. And I think that's a big part of marketing. You can experiment with it, but
Mm.
it's going to come from an angle, whether you
Yeah.
like it or
How many
not.
times have you been to a networking event and you've really liked somebody, and it's you've discovered the brand through the
Yes.
individual, and
Oh,
therefore
yeah.
therefore if they said to you, "Do you fancy coming for a coffee?" And suddenly it doesn't feel like a sale because you really like that person, and therefore it's a recommendation. And so you
Yeah.
can imagine that at scale, the impact of those micro conversations and what they potentially can do, for an organization is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also another really good example for someone who might not be as active on socials or online or any other place, but networking I don't know a single business these days that doesn't do it in some form or another. But
Mm,
absolutely, you're also going to gravitate towards the people you actually have an interest in talking to.
quite.
Maybe it's a little bit because of the company they come from and you want to connect with them. But
Yeah.
if they're the dullest, most negative person ever, you're going to go, maybe
Uh,
not.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so, so much. That has been an absolute brilliant session. Before we wrap up, is there any last tips or tricks you would recommend for kind of human centered employee advocacy as a brand engine, I suppose?
Well, I would say do connect with me, follow me on LinkedIn, and if anybody wants an audit, like a free half hour, I will look at their business, and I'll have a look at some of their employee
Hmm.
content, what it's saying. We'll do that totally free of charge, and then what we can do is we can make some recommendations, and that may lead to helping support you with a training workshop or something or whatever. But have a real think about this, because this is going to be transformational in the next few years. The power of personal brand and influence has never been more apparent. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, we'll be sure to post your LinkedIn underneath the podcast episode, so it'll be nice and easy to find you. Thank you, Jordan, so much for coming on the episode, and to everyone listening, I hope you really enjoyed that. Be sure to check in soon with our next episode. This has been the Masters of Marketing.
Bless you. Thanks very much.